The Cursed Conversations, Unveiling the Secrets of Cañadas. Scary story. In the haunting domain of messengers, a sinister chronicle unfurls. As irrational dread tightens its grip, my unease morphs into a spectral dance, stirred by the ominous presence of crows. These obsidian heralds, veiled in an aura of mystic demise, emerge as heralds of an imminent horror slithering through the obscurity. Prepare for a descent into the enigmatic, where the boundary between the tangible and the macabre dissolves, and the ominous cawing of these messengers reverberates with a tale foretelling doom. My name is Jesús, and now I live in a big city like Guadalajara, having fled small towns precisely to avoid anything related to those birds. The last town I lived in was called Cañadas, a small village with few inhabitants, but many beliefs and legends. It was there that I had a strange experience with crows. As a child, we lived with my grandmother for a while because my father went to the United States to work, and my mother and I didn't want to stay alone. It was a small house in a very isolated place. We had no electricity, and our only neighbor was a lady who always seemed to be alone, but was often heard chatting with someone. Above her house, 2 or 3 crows always flew, although there were other smaller blackbirds. I couldn't distinguish one from another. To me, they were all crows. When night fell, my grandmother would tell us stories, saying that crows are the souls of the deceased. She also claimed they were friends of witches who used them to bring news because they could speak. I found it somewhat scary to listen, especially as she did it by candlelight, which made me even more nervous. She told us that crows were mediators between this world and the unknown, capable of traveling between both realms, bringing wisdom and knowledge to witches. Intrigued by my grandmother's stories, I decided to spy on our neighbor to see if she truly was friends with crows, and to find out who she was talking to if she lived alone. One determined evening, I crossed the wire fence, dividing our properties carefully, avoiding chickens, dogs, and some cats. I approached the window to peer inside her house. The lady was sitting, doing something with her hands, and yes, there were 1 or 2 crows inside the house. I listened to her talk, but there was no audible response. Suddenly, she burst into laughter so loud that it scared me. I ran out, and I heard several laughs as well, but the lady was alone. As I sprinted, the animals outside became agitated, making a commotion. I ran faster until I reached my house and said nothing. The next day, 3 crows circled above my grandmother's house. She had told us that crows circled around corpses, or easy prey to warn predators. When I saw them, I started throwing stones to make them leave. In fact, I hit one. They turned to look at me, and one of them lunged at me, but I quickly got inside. I told my mom and grandmother, and they went out to see. I went out with them and started throwing stones again, but my grandmother told me not to do it. She said crows were known for their good memory, and if they remembered me, they could attack. From that day on, a crow perched on the roof. My grandmother said when a crow landed on a house, it was a bad omen, a sign of death. Messengers, a horror story. One sleepless night, I looked out the window and saw a crow burying something in our yard, making a strange laughter-like noise. Then it flew to the neighbor's house and entered through a broken window. My grandmother began to feel unwell, stopped eating, sometimes delirious, talking about these animals being friends of death, possessing human intelligence, and being deceivers. We listened without fully understanding. I started tormenting myself, thinking that by entering her property and throwing stones at the crows, I had caused harm to my grandmother. I felt guilty and believed I had to do something about it. The next night, filled with fear, I approached the neighbor's house. I peered through the window and saw the woman talking again, but this time there was someone responding to my amazement. She was conversing with a crow, and it replied and laughed like any person. I couldn't handle my nerves anymore, so I went back home without making any noise. I was almost certain that the lady was a witch, and my grandmother needed help. I was determined to get it. Without my grandmother overhearing, I told my mom, and we sought help from a woman known for healing. She instructed us to search the yard. Perhaps something had been buried. If we found it, we were not to touch it with our hands, but to burn it. That's what we did. I remembered seeing the crow burying something in the yard, so we went to investigate. We found a cloth doll with 2 pins and a photo of my grandmother, along with some hair that we assumed belonged to her. I told my mom not to touch them. I had a cloth, and I placed them on it. We set them on fire in an aluminum container far from the house while praying. We went inside, and I told my mother that I would talk to that lady to leave my grandmother alone. I went to our neighbor that night. When I entered her yard, 2 crows lunged at me. Perhaps, as my grandmother said, they recognized me and wanted to prevent me from advancing. The lady came out due to the commotion, and the crows let me pass. With a stern look, the woman asked me what I needed. Suppressing my nerves, I told her I needed to talk to her. With a gesture, she motioned for me to enter. Hesitating, I decided to go in. I paused at the door, sensing strange smells emanating from inside. When I entered, 2 crows inside watched me. There was some smoke, and I was frightened to see stuffed animals. The lady sat in the chair where I'd seen her before and asked if I came about my grandmother. Fearfully, I answered yes, expressing that I didn't want anything bad to happen to her. I apologized for spying on her, and she looked at me without blinking, asking what I needed to know, what my curiosity was. I asked if she was a witch, and instantly the crows cawed with laughter. Unable to control it, fear overwhelmed me. I started breathing heavily, and the lady, noticing it, smiled as if amused. She stood up, preparing something with herbs. As she did, she explained that there were different kinds of witches, and perhaps due to my young age, I wouldn't understand. She gave me what she had prepared and instructed me on how to give it to my grandmother. I took it hesitantly, apologized again, and thanked her. She said it was fine, But that crows don't forget. When I left, I felt relieved, but I didn't know what awaited me outside. After taking a few steps, the crows attacked me, pecking at me. I supposed they did it because I had thrown stones at them on several occasions. They made strange noises and intended to harm me. I remembered what people said, that crows gouge out your eyes. I covered my face and started running. I stumbled, got up, and continued running until I reached my grandmother's house. Before entering, I shook off my clothes, fixed my hair so they wouldn't look at me strangely, and calmed down a bit. I came in panting, filled with fear. Once inside, I told my mother what had happened. Nervously, she said we would give my grandmother what the lady had sent because she was very ill. We did so, and surprisingly, my grandmother started to feel better. From that day on, and for a long time, the crows didn't stop bothering me. As I mentioned, I was just a child. As the years passed, my grandmother died due to her age, and I decided never to live where there was even a single crow. After a while, I learned that in this region, there are no crows, only grapples that are very similar. The curious thing is that these don't speak. Here I am now, living in Guadalajara. I will never return to that town called Cañadas, or any town where those messengers of death, be they grackles or crows, fly. Thank you for joining us for this spine-tingling story. We hope you found it both thrilling and thought-provoking. If you enjoyed this video, please consider participating in our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing it with your friends. Your support goes a long way in helping us create more engaging content for you. Goodbye, and may you always tread carefully in the world of the unknown.